Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the weirdest things in Magic. Or I guess I should say I'm going to be talking about some more of the weirdest things in Magic because I've actually already done an episode or two about this topic. Now those episodes each came out over a year ago, but if you haven't seen them, make sure you do check them out. They cover weird things like, I don't know, one of the most powerful beings in the Magic multiverse with Emrakul somehow being able to be killed by 15 flying squirrels. Or how if you just happen to be on a horse, somehow you can't be blocked by basically anything. Equestrian skills are truly overpowered. Regardless, there are a ton of weird things in Magic that those episodes did not cover, so we've got a lot to go through today. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first weird thing in Magic that I'm going to be talking about today, I'm calling Let's Rumble. To illustrate this weird thing in Magic, let's talk about this creature, Denizen of the Deep. Now, Denizen of the Deep is a massive sea monster. It's an 11/11 massive serpent that lives in the deep ocean. Hence the name, Denizen of the Deep. Anyways, let's say your opponent has one of these. Scary, right? I mean, an 11/11 is nothing to scoff at. And on your side of the board, you've got, let's say, a Death Miss Raptor, a 3/3 dinosaur beast with Death Touch. Now, if you happen to swing and attack, your opponent probably isn't gonna block because, yeah, they'll take the 3 damage instead of losing their 11/11. So maybe you'll cast something like, I don't know, Prey Upon, and tell your Death Miss Raptor to fight it. Mechanically, this makes total sense, and it's a very sound decision. Your 3/3 does have Death Touch, so it's gonna take out your opponent's much larger 11/11. What doesn't make sense, though, is how did this actual fight occur? Your Raptor is clearly a land-based creature. Denizen of the Deep lives in the deep ocean. I can't imagine that raptors are exactly expert swimmers. Let's even just say that your raptor is a decent swimmer. It can get in the ocean, but how in the world is it gonna dive down and survive long enough to actually get down to this Denizen of the Deep? I mean, that thing's 20,000 leagues under the sea, if not more. So let's take a step back. You've got your Death Miss Raptor out there, and you say, hey, Death Miss Raptor, go fight that Denizen of the Deep. Your Death Miss Raptor goes to run to the beach, and then thinks about it and asks you, okay, now what? The only solution that I could see is if both of these creatures somehow had cell phones and could message each other, and Death Miss Raptor was like, hey bro, fight at the beach, 10 o'clock, okay? Obviously, this same scenario could apply to pretty much any giant sea monster that can go really far underneath the ocean, and any kind of creature that really can't dive down or swim that far, like a soldier or whatnot. Okay, while we're on the fight topic though, one more fight that is pretty funny though is the epic battle between Glacial Wall and Sedge Scorpion. Glacial Wall is a 0/7 wall with Defender, and Sedge Scorpion is just a 1/1 Scorpion with Death Touch. This massive wall, which incredibly powerful creatures could not break down, just gets walked up and touched by this Sedge Scorpion, and all of a sudden it just collapses. Now, I understand the flavor of Death Touch when it comes to things like scorpions having it because of poison. Obviously, if you poison something, it can die. But you can't poison a wall. But apparently I'm mistaken, and you definitely can in Magic. But now let's talk about some other potential flavor fails that don't quite make sense, and I'm going to be calling this category Drowning. Now there's a very cool card from Throne of Eldraine called Drown in the Loch. It's an instant for blue and a black, and it says choose one, counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard, or destroy target creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So with that second one, essentially you can kill a creature by drowning it. You look at the picture and you see a terrified human being drowned by a merfolk. Humans cannot breathe underwater for extended periods of time, much like raptors, or apparently raptors can. Anyways, so yeah, if a creature needs to breathe and you put them in water for an extended period of time and they can't breathe, it's game over for that creature. Makes sense. Now what doesn't make sense is how you can use this to drown a fish. Moat piranhas are fish. Fish have gills, which are organs that allow them to breathe underwater. So in reality, you couldn't drown a fish in a loch, but in Magic, of course you can. Apparently you can also drown Slinvoda the Rising Deep, a giant leviathan that again lives in the water. And you can even drown a water elemental, which is made up of water, which is quite ironic. Speaking of irony, let's talk about Walk the Plank. Now this is a very flavorful card which says, destroy target non-merfolk creature. In the picture we see someone being forced to walk the plank, and we've got some hungry sharks below waiting for them to jump. Now if that was a merfolk, apparently they could swim away, which yes, I guess makes sense. What doesn't make sense is when you make something like Voracious Great Shark walk the plank. First off, this thing is bigger than a boat. Let's say that you even had a boat that was somehow big enough to have a plank big enough to have this thing on. You force this Voracious Great Shark off into shark-infested waters. This thing is probably bigger than any of the other sharks in there, and it's just like, hey, how's it going, other sharks? Obviously, this can apply to other sea monsters as well, and maybe even spirits or other things that just don't make sense to be on a plank and be able to push off. A potentially even weirder one, though, comes with the incredibly iconic Lightning Bolt. Now, Lightning Bolt can kill a lot of things. It's 3 damage to any target at instant speed just for a red. Now, while it can take out a lot of things like a Birds of Paradise, one thing that it shouldn't be able to take out is something that's actually made of lightning. Like Lightning Elemental, Ball Lightning, and Lightning Mare. These things are made up of lightning. Logically, if you cast a lightning bolt at these things, it would probably just make it stronger. If you were an actual planeswalker in a duel with another planeswalker and they had a lightning elemental that they just summoned, your first thought probably wouldn't be, I should shoot lightning at that. But apparently it works. And let's move on to my last similar example to this with Burn from Within. Or pretty much any other fire-based spell could be put into here. Burning within a vampire? Sure, makes sense. You know, you set a fire inside of that vampire and it burns from within, which is absolutely horrifying and disgusting. But it makes sense, vampires are organic beings. They're made of flesh and bone, unlike a fire elemental, or amplifier, or a fire urchin. These are not made of flesh and bone, they are made of fire. Burning from within one of these makes absolutely no sense. Again, like the lightning example, by shooting fire at one of these things, you're probably just going to make it more powerful. But apparently in Magic, fighting fire with fire works. Somehow. Don't ask me how, I have no idea. But now let's move on to the next weird thing for today with the biggest threat in the Magic multiverse, this mouse. Okay, just kidding, it's just a 1/1. Which, if you actually think about it, how in the world is a mouse a 1/1? I guess maybe it's got, you know, that little pin that it could poke you with, I guess. I guess fighting against a mouse isn't nearly as ridiculous, though, as fighting against a doll. And maybe that's actually where it got the pin from. Stuffy Doll has taken out plenty of players in a format like Commander, which, if you think about it, is incredibly ridiculous. I mean, again, it's a doll. But what might be even more ridiculous is getting taken out by this child's imaginary friend. And believe me, Toothy has taken out plenty of players, which again, when you stop to think about it, is incredibly ridiculous. Now, on another note though, not that Toothy isn't already really powerful, but if Pierre could have imagined anything for his imaginary friend, then why didn't he imagine something that was incredibly OP? Yeah, my imaginary friend is right next to me, can't you see him? Yeah, he's a 95/95, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, double strike, sure. Can't be blocked, illusion. Yeah. He also has pay 0 phase out, pay 0 phase in. Yeah, that's how that works, right? Player death touch? Is that a thing? Yeah, he's got player death touch. If he hits you, you're dead. Yeah, so that's Toothy, my imaginary friend, standing right next to me. Okay? Oh wait, forgot to tell you, he's got haste, so he's attacking right now. And I'm not saying that Pierre didn't do a good job, but there are just some small adjustments that could have been made to make Toothy a little deadlier. And speaking of small adjustments, let's bring back our little mouse friend in a category that I'm calling Improvised Weaponry. Now, obviously, this little mouse already has an improvised weapon with this pin, which again, apparently it uses to stab things. So it might not be your friendliest mouse. Anyways, there's an actual card in Magic that lets you improvise just like this mouse did with Bludgeon Brawl. Bludgeon Brawl is an enchantment that says each non-creature, non-equipment artifact is an equipment with equip X, and equipped creature gets +X+0, where X is that artifact's converted mana cost. So as you can see in the picture, these warriors are gonna bludgeon each other with whatever they found. Whatever artifacts are just lying around, use as a blunt object, and you smack your opponent with it. You don't necessarily need an equipment like a sword, you can just hit them with basically anything. So let's help our little mouse out by giving him a new kind of weapon with this Sky Diamond. It's hard, it's sharp, and it's better than a pin. By equipping it to our mouse has 3 power instead of just 1. So this pretty much makes sense. This mouse could find this diamond and wield it as a weapon. Now where this starts to get weird is when you think about the mouse wielding, Bolus's Citadel. That's right, this tiny little mouse just picked up Bolus's Citadel and it's gonna whack you with it. Now if you can see Nicol Bolas on the top of that little pyramid thing on top of the Citadel, Nicol Bolas is a giant elder dragon, and he looks tiny. For comparison size, this mouse appears to be, 10 buttons tall. And yet now this mouse can pick up this giant Citadel and whack your opponent with it. And that's not even the weirdest thing. What if your mouse picks up Parhelion too? This is a flying fortress that your tiny little mouse is somehow gonna get to and be able to carry around with it and whack people. I guess technically it's probably not flying around if it's not crewed, so that one might make sense, but again, scale-wise, definitely doesn't make sense. But now to make things even weirder, let's introduce the card Liquid Metal Coating. It's an artifact that has tap, target permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. So thanks to this, now we can equip even more ridiculous things onto our little mouse. How about an enchantment like Thought Reflection? Which in this case, what in the world would that even look like? But let's not think about that too much because it's making my head hurt, so let's move on to the next ridiculous thing with this mouse carrying around a Slumbering Isle. Erixmathes, while it appears to be an island, is actually a giant kraken. But as long as it is sleeping, having a slumber counter on it, it is a land and not a creature. So by using liquid metal coating, we can make it into an artifact land and then equip it onto our mouse. So our tiny little mouse has traded away that pin for an island that he uses to smack people. Try to wrap your head around that one while realizing that he can also pick up a god and whack you with it. For example, as long as your devotion in green and blue is less than 7, Crewfix isn't a creature. So again, you use the coating to make it into an artifact, and then you equip it, and then you bash your opponent on the head with this god. Now, a mouse doing this might seem incredibly ridiculous, but what might be even more ridiculous is an egg doing it. How in the world is this egg picking up and holding this god? Or how about a wall? How is this wall holding this god? And if you think that's tough to figure out, let's talk about this other godly scenario with Xenagos, God of Revels, and Xenagos the Reveler. Let's say that our devotion to red and green is 7 or more, so Xenagos, God of Revels, is a creature. We also have Xenagos the Reveler in play, a planeswalker. We use that coating to make Xenagos the Reveler into an artifact planeswalker. Then, thanks to Bludgeon Brawl, we can equip Xenagos with Xenagos. That's right, God Xenagos picks up planeswalker Xenagos and whacks your opponent with him. So yeah, Magic can be a really weird game. One more example, then I promise we're done with this category. Jace's projection, carrying around and whacking your opponent with Jace the Mind Sculptor is also really funny. Jace apparently created an illusion to pick himself up, to have that illusion beat your opponent with him. And with all of those ridiculous scenarios covered, let's move on. And speaking of ridiculous scenarios, let's talk about Wall of Kelp in a category that I'm calling Blocked. Now, Wall of Kelp is a 0/3 defender that has pay blue and tap it, create a 0/1 blue plant wall creature token with defender named Kelp. Now, Wall of Kelp is an incredibly old card from Homelands, and I had no idea that this card existed until I went to go make my episode, The Tokens That Don't Exist. If you haven't seen that episode yet, make sure you go check it out because it goes over the tokens that actually don't exist in real life. And there are actually quite a few of them, including the Kelp token that is made by Wall of Kelp. The one that you're seeing right now is actually one that's just used on Magic Online. There actually isn't a physical copy of this that you can buy. Now that might be weird, but it's not actually the weird thing that I'm going to be talking about. Now, Wall of Kelp, as you can see, is an underwater wall. What's kind of weird about it, though, is if I decide to attack you with, say, my soldier, you can block with your Wall of Kelp. So either your wall got up and left the water to block my soldier, or my soldier, for whatever reason, decided to swim through the water to try to get to you. Now, if you don't think that's weird, how about this one? Tuk Tuk Rubble Fort is a 0/3 wall with defender and reach. Basically, it just looks like a fort made by goblins with some spiky things on it. Now, it might not seem too weird at first, but when you think about it a little more, it gets pretty weird. This wall has reach, which means it can block creatures with flying. So if someone else has, say, a dragon, it can't just fly over this wall. It's not like the wall's moving, it's just that the dragon somehow can't get over wherever this wall is. Therefore, this wall must be incredibly tall. I mean, if a dragon or other things can't fly over it, this thing has got to be thousands of feet in the air. That would make it one of the tallest, if not the tallest, structure in all of Zendikar. So try to wrap your head around that. Next, let's talk about some weird modal dual-face card things, which are otherwise known as MDFCs. Let's say that I've got my very lovely throne in play, the Throne of Death. But oh no, an opponent is trying to destroy my Throne of Death. Luckily for me, I've got a Snowland in play and I've got enough mana to cast Blizzard Strix. So I can flash it in, then I exile my Throne of Death and I can return it back to the battlefield under my control at the beginning of the next end step. So awesome, I save my Throne of Death from that removal spell. The end of the turn comes and I'm waiting for that Throne of Death to come back. But instead of it coming back, this small child with a scythe showed up in its place. I temporarily got rid of the throne, and it somehow came back as an angsty child with a weapon. Well, that's kind of weird. Let's see if this works on other things. Well, I don't exactly like the look of this Murkwater pathway. I mean, this place seems pretty desolate, and that water doesn't look too clean. So let's try this again and see if Blizzard Strix will change this to something else. End of the turn comes in. Oh, look, a beautiful clear water pathway. Much friendlier looking. Let's try this again. What if I change this Kazandu Valley? Go for it, Blizzard Strix. End of the turn, and my valley turned into a mammoth. My land somehow turned into this creature. That's kind of weird. Okay, I'm not upset about it, but it's kind of weird. Well, then if that's the case, then how about Agadim the Undercrypt? There's got to be some pretty scary and powerful things in this Undercrypt, right? So once again, Blizzard Strix, do your thing. All right, end of the turn. Okay. Agadim, where are you? And nothing shows up because Agadim's Awakening is a sorcery and that doesn't work. Mechanically, yes, it makes sense that when you exile something that it comes back as the front side, but when you actually think about it, it's just kind of weird. You exile a throne and instead of coming back a throne, it comes back as an angsty child. You exile a land and it turns into a different kind of land. You exile a valley and it turns into a mammoth. Or you exile an undercrypt and it turns into nothing. And speaking of doing nothing, let's move on to our next weird thing with doing nothing. And this weird category is going to start a nostalgic card from my childhood with Epheto Alchemist. Epheto Alchemist can tap to untap target artifact or creature. Note that does not specify another creature. So Epheto Alchemist can tap to untap himself. Now this does absolutely nothing, but you can do it as many times as you want. So for this scenario, let's just say Epheto Alchemist happens to be best friends with Magda. They're hanging out on your battlefield and Epheto Alchemist is doing his tap-untap thing. Now, Magda's used to Epheto Alchemist doing this weird thing, which he does for whatever reason. So she's not fazed by it and doesn't think twice about it. But then their other friend Imagecrafter walks in the room and says, "Hey Epheto, you're a dwarf now." Epheto thinks nothing of it and goes back to tapping and untapping. But although Epheto thought nothing of it, this changes everything for Magda. Magda says, "Hey, what you're doing there is really important. Here's a treasure." Epheto taps and untaps again. Oh, here's another one, and another one, and another one. Okay, what you're doing is really cool. Have all the treasure that you want. And you know what we could do with this treasure? Let's use it to buy some dragons and artifacts. And none of this makes any sense. But it's powerful and cool, so deal with it. But speaking of treasure, let's move on to our last weird magic thing for the day, which I'm calling frozen assets. So in case you didn't know, treasures are token artifacts that you can tap to sacrifice to add 1 mana of any color. Makes sense, you're kind of exchanging this treasure to buy things. Now what doesn't make sense is when you add in something like Blind Obedience. This is an enchantment that says, artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So let's say that this is on the battlefield and you've got a treasure that comes into play. Unfortunately it comes into play tapped, so you can't use it. It's kind of like there's a hold on your account for whatever reason. You can literally point at the treasure and say, look, I've got it right here. I promise it's right here. I just can't give it to you now. I'll give it to you next turn. And yes, I know there's some gold in the treasure, but it's not gold. If it was gold, I could give it to you right now. Because gold doesn't have to be tapped to add mana, you just have to sacrifice it. So even though in the picture treasure, there is definitely gold, it is not gold, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that's a bit weird. But with that, that is all the weirdest things in Magic, at least for today. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode because I had a lot of fun making it. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are. And as always, thanks again and have a good one.